I remember the evening Alan told me. It was unseasonably warm for a spring day, the kind that makes you think summer is just around the corner. I was in the kitchen, lost in the rhythm of chopping vegetables for dinner, when Alan walked in. He had that look, the one that meant something was weighing on him. I braced myself for company news, or perhaps another tedious family matter he needed my help with, but nothing could have prepared me for what he said next. "Linda, I got Claire pregnant. We need to divorce." The knife slipped from my hand, nicking my finger. I barely noticed the sting. My world, the very foundation I had built my life upon for the past 15 years, was crumbling. I stared at him, searching for a hint of jest. But his eyes were earnest, pained even. How long had this been going on under my nose? Claire, the 28-year-old from accounting, vivacious, with a laugh that filled the room. I had always thought her charming, a valuable asset to our team. Now she was the other woman. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to unleash the storm of emotions brewing inside me. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself saying, "We should discuss this, all three of us." Alan looked surprised, but nodded in agreement. That night, I lay in our bed, alone. The room felt larger, emptier. I had long suspected that the love between Alan and me had faded, but the reality of his betrayal struck a different chord. It was not the loss of love that wounded me. It was the shattering of trust, the humiliation. The following morning, I went to the office earlier than usual. My eyes were swollen from crying, but I masked it well. I needed time to think, to plan. But fate had other ideas. As I stood by the coffee machine nursing my cup, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. "Why didn't you leave her sooner?" It was Claire's voice, tinged with impatience. Alan's response was a cold, calculated chuckle. "She's good at her job. Plus, she can't have kids, remember? It's convenient to keep her around for now." My hand tightened around the coffee cup, the heat barely registering. Their words, laced with contempt, echoed in my mind. They saw me as a tool, an inconvenience to be tolerated. The pain of infertility, a struggle that had been mine alone, was now a weapon in their hands. I stepped away from the coffee machine unnoticed. They hadn't seen me, but I had seen enough. As I returned to my office, a plan began to take shape. Alan and Claire had made a fool of me, but I would have the last laugh. I was Linda, a woman scorned, yes, but also a woman with resources and wit. They wouldn't know what hit them. As I drove to work the next day, memories flooded my mind, memories of Alan and I, back when we were just two dreamers with stars in our eyes. We met in college, in a crowded lecture hall. He was the charismatic one, always surrounded by friends, while I preferred the quiet of the library. Our worlds couldn't have been more different. Yet fate brought us together. Our courtship was a whirlwind. He was charming, attentive, and his family's wealth never overshadowed his personality. We married amid a sea of smiling faces, and I thought I had found my happily ever after. But as the years passed, the man I married seemed to fade away, replaced by a stranger with a cold heart. He stopped looking at me with warmth, stopped making plans with me. His business trips grew longer, his excuses flimsier, and then came the infertility diagnosis. My diagnosis. It was a blow, one that I bore alone, as Alan grew distant, buried in his work, or so I thought. Now, as I sat in my office, the pieces clicked into place. The late nights, the whispered phone calls, Claire's lingering looks. I had been blind, but no more. The day dragged on, each hour punctuated by Alan's and Claire's laughter echoing from down the hall. It was as if they were mocking me, reveling in their secret tryst. But their carefree days were numbered. After work, I stopped by a small, nondescript office, a private investigator's. The man who greeted me was gruff, with a face that hid too much of the world's ugliness. I laid out my situation, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I need evidence," I told him. "Proof of their affair, and anything else you can find about Claire." The investigator, a Mr. Jacobs, nodded, his eyes sharp. "I'll get you what you need. These types always slip up." As I drove home, a plan began to form. I would not be cast aside, a forgotten chapter in Alan's life. I would fight back, not just for myself, but for every moment I had wasted on a man who saw me as nothing more than a convenience. At home, I cooked dinner as if nothing had changed. Alan was his usual self, distracted, disinterested, but I saw him now for what he truly was, a coward hiding behind a facade of respectability. That night as I lay in bed, I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for revenge. I was fighting for the woman I used to be, the woman who believed in love and honesty. Alan and Claire had taken so much from me, but they wouldn't take my dignity. Not without a fight. I closed my eyes, envisioning the look on their faces when their world came crashing down. They thought they had won, but the game had just begun, and I was playing for keeps. I arranged the meeting at our house, a neutral ground where I could maintain control. Alan and Claire arrived together, a little too comfortable in each other's company. Claire, in her naivete, wore a smile, perhaps thinking this was her moment of triumph. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "I think it's important we discuss how to proceed." Alan nodded, his face a mask of faux regret. "Linda, I know this is hard, but I think it's for the best." Claire chimed in, her tone sickeningly sweet. "Linda, I'm so sorry. This wasn't planned. It just happened." I suppressed a scoff. Her apology was as empty as her morals. "Let's cut to the chase," I said. "Alan, you want a divorce. Fine. But where does that leave me? Where does that leave us as a company?" Alan shifted uncomfortably. "We thought, that is, Claire and I, we think it's best if things continue as they are at work. You're a valuable asset to the company, Linda." Claire nodded eagerly, her facade of concern transparent. "Yes, you're so good at what you do. It wouldn't make sense to change that." Their condescension was palpable. They saw me as a pawn in their little game, a problem to be managed and controlled. But I wasn't about to let them dictate my fate. "And what about Claire's situation?" I asked, my gaze fixed on Alan. "How do you plan to handle that?" Alan cleared his throat. "We're figuring it out, but I assure you it won't affect the company." I leaned back, my expression unreadable. "I see. Well, I have some conditions of my own." They both looked at me, surprise flickering in their eyes. "Conditions?" Alan echoed. "Yes, for one, I want a significant settlement. If we're to divorce, I won't walk away empty-handed." Claire's smile faltered, but Alan quickly recovered. "Of course, Linda, we'll make sure you're taken care of." "And second," I continued, my voice hardening, "I want transparency. No more secrets, no more lies, starting with the company's finances." Alan frowned. "What do you mean?" "Oh, just curious about how the company's funds have been used lately, especially the entertainment and travel expenses." My eyes locked with Claire's, watching as a flicker of panic passed through them. Alan was quick to dismiss it. "That's a strange request, but sure, we have nothing to hide." "Good," I said, standing up. "Then I look forward to seeing the accounts." As they left, Claire's uneasy glance and Alan's stiff back told me all I needed to know. They were rattled, unsure of my game, and that was exactly where I wanted them. Alone in the silence of my home, I allowed myself a small smile. The first move had been made, and the board was set. Now it was time to play. The following week was a masterclass in patience. I pored over the company's financial records, my eyes scanning for inconsistencies. And there they were, hidden in plain sight, irregularities in the entertainment and travel expenses, just as I suspected. Claire's handiwork, no doubt. I arranged a meeting with Mr. Jacobs, the private investigator. His office was cluttered with files and old coffee cups, a testament to his busy schedule. He greeted me with a stack of photographs and recordings. "I've got what you asked for," he said, pushing the evidence across his desk. "Your husband and Miss Claire have been quite indiscreet." The photos were damning. Alan and Claire in various stages of intimacy, captured in secret moments. But it was the recordings that hit hardest. Their conversations, laced with arrogance and disregard for anyone but themselves, were like a punch to the gut. "Keep digging," I instructed Mr. Jacobs. "Anything you can find on Claire's financial activities." As the days passed, Alan and Claire grew more uncomfortable around me. They whispered in corners, casting wary glances my way. Good, let them squirm. Finally, I had enough. I called them both into my office, the evidence laid out neatly on my desk. "What is this?" Alan asked, his voice unsteady as he eyed the photographs. "Proof of your affair," I said calmly. "And that's just the beginning. Claire, care to explain the irregularities in the company's expenses?" Claire's face paled. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "I've had the accounts audited," I continued. "Seems you've been embezzling company funds, Claire, falsifying expense reports for personal gain." Alan turned to Claire, his expression a mix of shock and betrayal. "Is this true?" Claire stammered, her composure crumbling. I can explain. It's not what it looks like. I think it's exactly what it looks like, I countered. You've been stealing from the company, and you, Alan, have been too blinded by your affair to notice. Alan's gaze shifted between the evidence and Claire, his face a mask of confusion and anger. I had no idea, he muttered. Of course, you didn't, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You were too busy playing house with Claire to pay attention to the business. The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with the weight of their guilt. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I'll be taking this to the board, I announced. They'll decide how to proceed. As for our marriage, Alan, consider it over. You'll hear from my lawyer about the divorce and settlement. Claire was on the verge of tears, her facade completely shattered. Alan looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came. As they left my office, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. The first part of my plan was in motion. They thought they could play me for a fool, but I was the one pulling the strings now. The board meeting was a spectacle I wouldn't soon forget. I presented the evidence of Claire's embezzlement and the photos of her affair with Alan. The directors were aghast, their faces a mix of shock and indignation. Alan tried to speak, his voice trembling. This isn't what it seems. I was unaware of the financial discrepancies. Claire? I prodded, my gaze fixed on her. She was a mess, her usual poise gone. It's not. I didn't mean for it to go this far. But it did, I said coldly, and now you'll face the consequences. The board was unanimous in their decision. Claire was to be terminated immediately, and a formal investigation into the embezzlement would commence. Alan's fate was equally sealed, a leave of absence, effective immediately, pending a deeper inquiry into his role in the matter. As they left the boardroom, defeated and disgraced, I felt a surge of vindication. This was only the beginning of their downfall. The next few days were a whirlwind. The news of the scandal spread like wildfire, tarnishing both Alan's and Claire's reputations. Claire was arrested for embezzlement, her tearful mugshot plastered across the local news. Alan, meanwhile, became a pariah. His absence from the company sparked rumors and speculation. His world, once so secure and privileged, was crumbling around him. One evening, as I sat alone in the house we once shared, I received a call from Alan. His voice was weak, desperate. Linda, please, I need your help. I didn't know about the embezzlement. You have to believe me. His pleas fell on deaf ears. You made your bed, Alan. Now you have to lie in it. But I love you, Linda. Can't we try to work this out? I almost laughed. Love? You have a funny way of showing it. Goodbye, Alan. I hung up, a sense of finality washing over me. This was more than just revenge. It was justice. They had tried to use and discard me, but I was not a woman to be underestimated. In the silence of the night, I reflected on the path that had led me here. The pain, the betrayal, the fight. I had lost a lot, but I had also gained a newfound strength, a strength I never knew I had. Alan and Claire had played a dangerous game, and they had lost. The price of their deceit was their undoing. And as for me, I was just getting started. The fallout from the scandal continued to ripple through our lives. Having been released on bail, faced a future marred by legal battles and public disgrace. Her once bright career was now in ruins, her name synonymous with betrayal and greed. Alan, on the other hand, had become a shadow of his former self. His leave of absence turned into an indefinite suspension, and his name was now a byword for foolishness and poor judgment in the business community. One afternoon, I sat in my newly redecorated office, the space now reflecting my elevated position within the company. My promotion to a senior role was a bittersweet victory. It was a role I had earned, yet it was also a reminder of the price paid for it. As I reviewed a report, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Hesitantly, I opened it, a picture of Claire, working at a local diner, her face haggard, her eyes devoid of the spark they once held. I felt a pang of something. Not quite pity, but an acknowledgement of the human cost of this entire saga. She had wronged me, yes, but her punishment seemed to stretch far beyond what I had initially envisioned. Later that week, I met with Alan's mother for coffee. She was a stern, no-nonsense woman who had always respected my work ethic. "Linda, I'm sorry for what my son did to you," she said, her voice firm. "You didn't deserve any of this." I sipped my coffee, the warmth comforting against the chill of the cafe. Thank you. I just wish things had turned out differently. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. You're a strong woman, Linda, stronger than my son ever realized. The conversation shifted to the company and we discussed its future. It was a future I would be a part of, albeit in a way I had never anticipated. As I walked back to my car, my mind wandered to the last time I saw Alan, his pleading eyes, the desperation in his voice. I had wanted him to suffer, to feel the pain he had caused me, and he had. But the satisfaction I had expected to feel was muted, replaced by a sense of somber realization. Revenge had come at a cost, not just to Alan and Claire, but to me as well. I had won, but the victory was hollow. The love I once had for Alan was gone, replaced by a void that no sense of triumph could fill. That evening, as I sat on my porch, watching the sunset, I pondered the strange nature of revenge. It was a fire that burned everything in its path, leaving only ashes in its wake. I had sought justice, and I had gotten it. But as the stars began to twinkle in the twilight sky, I wondered if it was worth the price. Months had passed since the board meeting that changed everything. The company had stabilized, and my role as a senior executive had become my new normal. But it was a normal tinged with the remnants of a past I was still trying to leave behind. One crisp morning, I received an invitation to a charity event hosted by the company. It was the kind of event where appearances mattered, where the who's who of the business world mingled. I hesitated before accepting. It would be my first public appearance since the scandal. As I mingled among the guests, a sense of accomplishment filled me. I had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. Yet, in the crowd, I spotted Alan. He looked older, warier. Our eyes met across the room, a silent acknowledgement of all that had transpired. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Alan approached me. "Linda," he began, his voice hesitant, "I wanted to apologize for everything." I studied his face, searching for any trace of the man I once loved. "Your apology won't change the past, Alan." "I know," he replied, a hint of sadness in his eyes, "but I needed you to know. I regret it all." I nodded, accepting his words, if not fully forgiving him. "I hope you find peace, Alan." As he walked away, a weight lifted off my shoulders. It was time to let go of the anger and pain. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the routine and challenges it presented. But I also found time for myself, rediscovering passions and interests I had long neglected. One afternoon, I visited a small art gallery, a place I used to love. As I admired the paintings, a sense of tranquility washed over me. Life was moving on, and so was I. Alan's mother and I continued to meet occasionally. Her wisdom and guidance were a source of strength and inspiration. She had become more than just my former mother-in-law. She was a mentor, a friend. Looking back, the journey from betrayal to empowerment had been tumultuous. I had sought revenge and achieved it, but it was not the revenge that defined me. It was the resilience, the ability to rise from the ashes of a broken heart and a shattered trust. As I stood on my porch one evening, watching another sunset, I realized that life was a tapestry of experiences, both good and bad. Each thread was essential, weaving together to create the person I had become. I was no longer just Linda, the woman scorned. I was Linda, the survivor, the fighter, the woman who had faced her deepest fears and come out stronger on the other side. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. And as the stars emerged in the darkening sky, I knew that whatever lay ahead, I was ready to meet it with an open heart and a renewed spirit.